You've stood at a funeral before. Maybe you wore black. Maybe you didn't know what to say. You watched a body lowered into the ground, or scattered as ash, or sealed behind glass. It felt like tradition. It felt like something we do because it's polite, because it's expected, because everyone else does it too. But the real answer is far stranger. What you were doing at that funeral is older than agriculture, older than cities, older than language as you know it. And the people who started it weren't fully human at all. Go back 100,000 years. Long before pyramids, long before writing, a group of Neanderthals in a cave in northern Iraq gathers around a body. They dig into the earth with stone tools and bare hands. They place the body carefully, not carelessly. Some researchers believe they scattered flowers over it. For decades, that flower detail sat at the center of a heated scientific argument. Was it real, or was it pollen blown in by burrowing rodents? Here's the strange part. It might not even matter, because the debate itself proves something bigger. Scientists have spent 70 years arguing over whether a Neanderthal grave contained flowers. Why would anyone care that much? Because if it's true, it means something you weren't taught in school. It means grief didn't start with you. It didn't start with your grandparents, or their grandparents, or the first pharaoh. It started in the dark, with a species we used to call subhuman. For most of the 20th century, that's exactly how Neanderthals were described. Brutish, simple, barely capable of tool use, let alone emotion. Early reconstructions painted them as hunched, ape-like, dim-witted cousins who lost the evolutionary race because they simply weren't smart enough. That image stuck for generations. It shaped textbooks, museum dioramas, even the word Neanderthal as an insult you might still hear today. But burial evidence doesn't fit that story. You don't dig a grave by accident. You don't position a body with care again and again across multiple individuals without some internal sense that this act matters. The deeper researchers looked, the harder the old narrative became to defend. The site is called Shanidar Cave. Archaeologist Ralph Solecki excavated it in the 1950s and 1960s, and he found something no one expected. Multiple burials, bodies positioned deliberately, not tossed aside. One skeleton, known as Shanidar 4, had unusually high concentrations of pollen clustered around it. Solecki proposed the pollen came from flowers placed on the body as offerings. Critics pushed back for decades. Some argued the pollen came from a burrowing rodent called a Persian gird, which is known to stockpile flowers underground. You'd think this argument would matter only to specialists. It doesn't. It matters to you. Because somewhere in this fight over pollen grains is a question about what makes something human. Is it language? Is it tools? Or is it this? The unbearable need to mark a death. To say, you mattered, and I am not ready to let you disappear into the dirt without a gesture. Think about your own instinct the last time you lost someone or thought about losing someone. You didn't calculate the biological cost of stopping to grieve. You didn't ask whether it served your survival. You just felt it. Immediate and heavy, like gravity had doubled. That feeling is not a modern invention. It is ancient hardware, running on a body built for something else entirely. Fast forward from Shanidar to a very different discovery. Thousands of kilometers away and thousands of years later. Deep in a South African cave system called Rising Star, so narrow that only small-bodied researchers could squeeze through, paleoanthropologist Berger and his team found something in 2013 that stunned the field. Bones, hundreds of them, belonging to a previously unknown species, Homo naledi, a small-brained relative with a mix of primitive and modern features. The bones weren't scattered by a flood or dragged in by predators. They were deep inside a cave system that would have required deliberate, repeated, dangerous journeys through total darkness. Berger's team proposed something radical. That Homo naledi, a species with a brain roughly a third the size of yours, may have been intentionally depositing their dead in that chamber. On purpose, in the dark, without fire, based on soot evidence found much later. If that's true, it rewrites everything you assumed about the birth of ritual. You were taught, maybe without even noticing it, that ritual required big brains, complex thought, language, culture. Homo naledi had none of the brain size we associate with those things, and yet Here's a species possibly hauling bodies through blackness into a chamber that offered no food, no shelter, and no survival benefit whatsoever. Why would you do that? Why would any creature spend energy, take on real physical risk, crawl through spaces barely wide enough for a human shoulder just to place a body somewhere specific? There's no clean answer, but there's a pattern, and the pattern shows up again and again across the fossil record, long before anyone wrote the word soul. Some scientists remain skeptical of the Naledi burial claim. They argue natural processes, water flow, sediment shifts, could explain how bodies ended up deep in the chamber without any intention at all. That's a fair challenge. Science should demand it, but even the skeptics can't fully explain away the pattern of repeated deposits in a single, hard-to-reach location over what appears to be an extended period of time. And notice what's happening here. You're not just learning a fact about an extinct species, you're watching the boundary of what counts as human behavior get pushed further and further back, one stubborn discovery at a time. Move forward again to Sungir, in modern-day Russia, roughly 34,000 years ago. Here, archaeologists found something almost impossible to look at without feeling something shift in your chest. Two children, buried head-to-head, covered in thousands of painstakingly carved ivory beads. Each bead alone would have taken hours to make. Multiply that by thousands, and you're looking at what may represent years of collective labor, dedicated entirely to two young lives that had already ended. This wasn't a burial of convenience, this was a burial of devastation, translated into craftsmanship. Anthropologist Erik Trinkaus, who studied the Sungir remains extensively, noted the extraordinary investment represented in these graves, work that reflected not simple disposal, but something closer to what you might call a reverence. You have to sit with that for a second. Ice Age hunter-gatherers, living hand-to-mouth in brutal cold, chose to divert an enormous amount of their limited time and resources toward decorating the dead. Not feeding the living, not building shelter. Decorating bodies that would never again need warmth, food, or beauty. That is not a survival strategy. That is something else entirely. That is love, expressed through labor, because love had no other language yet. Consider the math for a moment. Estimates suggest each ivory bead at Sungir could take between 30 minutes and an hour to carve using Stone Age tools. Multiply that by roughly 10,000 beads spread across both children's graves. That's thousands of hours from a community that likely numbered only in the dozens, all pointed toward two bodies that could no longer benefit from any of it. Why would evolution allow that? Grief, on paper, looks like a waste of resources. It slows you down. It distracts you from hunting, from gathering, from protecting the living. And yet, every human society we've ever studied grieves anyway. That should tell you something. Whatever grief costs you in the short term, it must be paying for something even more valuable in the long run. Here's where it gets stranger still. This behavior, this deep compulsion to mark death with meaning, doesn't appear to be uniquely modern human at all. Neanderthals, Homo naledi, and early Homo sapiens all show signs of it, separated by tens of thousands of years and, in some cases, entirely different evolutionary branches. Something about death demanded a response, and multiple species, independently or through shared ancestry we don't fully understand, arrived at similar answers. Dig, place, mark. Remember, archaeologist Paul Pettitt, who has spent much of his career studying Paleolithic burial practices, has argued that the emergence of deliberate burial reflects an early form of what you might call the archaeology of mind. Not just behavior, but belief. A recognition that death changes something, that a body is no longer simply an object, and that this change deserves acknowledgement. You already know this feeling, even if you've never named it. Think about the last time you saw an old photo of someone who has died. You didn't see paper and ink. You felt their absence, sharp and specific, as if the photo itself carried weight. That reaction isn't logical. It's ancestral. It's the same wiring that pushed a Neanderthal to scatter pollen, that pushed a small-brained hominin into a lightless cave, that pushed a grieving parent 34,000 years ago to spend a season stringing ivory beads for a child who would never wear them. So why do you still do it? Why funerals? Why flowers? Why the black clothing and the careful words and the moment of silence? Because somewhere inside you is a continuation of the exact same impulse that built Shanidar's grave, and Rising Star's chamber, and Sungir's beadwork. You are not performing a social script invented by recent civilization. You are running one of the oldest programs your species, and possibly Atharid,